So, picture this for a second.
Yeah.
You are standing with this massive crowd of people.
Thousands and thousands of people.
Right. I mean, families, kids, the elderly, just generations of your community. And your toes are practically sinking into the mud at the edge of this completely impassable, churning body of water.
There is literally nowhere to go forward.
Nowhere. The sea is just stretching out to the horizon, and it's cold, it's unyielding. But, the crazy thing is, the real terror isn't actually the water.
No, it's what's behind you.
Exactly. Because if you turn around, if you look back at the horizon, you see this massive dark cloud of dust rising up into the sky, and it's choking out the sun.
Yeah.
And before you even hear it, you can actually feel the rumble of the earth under your feet, the vibrations of hundreds of these ironclad war chariots just thundering towards you.
These aren't just, random soldiers.
No, these are your former oppressors, the
Yeah.
exact people who enslaved you and your parents and your grandparents for centuries. And they've suddenly changed their minds about letting you go.
They want you back.
Right. And now you are back completely against the sea. You're entirely unarmed. You are entirely trapped. I mean, the geography itself has just conspired against you.
It's the absolute definition of a nowhere to run moment.
It really is. Welcome, everybody, to today's Deep Dive. I'm your host, and I'm joined, as always, by our resident expert. And today, we are exploring this exact scenario.
Yeah, the crossing of the Red Sea in Exodus chapters 14 and 15.
But I want to be super clear right up front. Our mission today is not just to, recount an ancient escape story like we're reading from some dusty history textbook.
Right, we're not just doing an autopsy on a famous miracle to see, how the mechanics of it worked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have some incredible source material grounding us today. It's this really profound text by Chris R. Velasquez, and it's called Deliverance Through the Sea. Plus, we've got these incredibly detailed infographics that map out the theology and the timeline of this whole event.
And what this text argues, and it does it so compellingly, is that the Red Sea crossing is this massive theological threshold.
It's not just a cool origin tale.
No, it's not. It is revelation. It's the definitive anatomy of grace under pressure.
The anatomy of grace under pressure. I love that phrasing. And so for you listening right now, whether you are currently backed into a corner in your own life, like maybe you're facing a medical sea or a financial sea or some relational dead end where you feel totally trapped.
Or maybe you just want to understand the foundational blueprint for how the rest of the Bible talks about salvation.
Yeah, either way, this deep dive is going to fundamentally reframe how you view crisis and deliverance and freedom. So let's just get into it.
We really have to start with the transition from physical geography to internal geography.
Right.
Because to understand the rescue, you first have to understand the profound psychology of the trap itself.
Right. The setup is clear. Israel has left Egypt. The plagues are over. But Pharaoh is sitting back in his palace, and he sort of does the math.
He realizes he just lost his massive free labor force.
Yeah, and he regrets it. So he mobilizes his elite chariot units, and he corners the Israelites at the sea. So externally, they are hemmed in by raw imperial military power.
But internally, it's a completely different kind of trap. The Velasquez text focuses heavily on their psychological reaction in Exodus 14, verses 11 and 12.
They don't just get scared.
No, they completely panic. They immediately turn on Moses, and they accuse him of bringing them out to the desert just to die.
And then they do this thing that is just so tragically recognizable. They start romanticizing their past slavery.
Yeah.
They literally say, "Didn't we tell you in Egypt to leave us alone so we could serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve them than to die in the wilderness."
It's just wild to think about.
I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around that level of despair, to look back at chains and whips and think, yeah, I actually miss those.
It's a devastatingly honest portrait of the human trauma response, though. And the author points out this brilliant insight here. He says, the body may be walking away from Egypt while the heart still fears Pharaoh.
Oh, wow. That is good.
Right. This is the precise mechanism of how bondage lingers in the human soul. You can legally and physically take a people out of slavery in, an afternoon.
But taking the slavery out of the people.
Exactly. That is a generational, agonizing process. In this moment of intense crisis, they don't see it as a hurdle.
Yeah.
They interpret it as total cosmic abandonment.
So their minds just revert to the captive mindset because that's the only neural pathway they have.
400 years of neural pathways, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because when they say it would have been better to serve them, That's pure trauma talking. It really reminds me of adopting a rescued animal.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Like, if you've ever brought home a dog that came from a severely abusive situation, you know that even after they're living in a safe, loving home, if you raise your hand just a little too quickly to grab a coffee mug or something,
The dog flinches.
it violently powers. The
Yeah.
physical cage is totally gone. The abusive owner is miles and miles away, but the mental cage is still entirely intact.
The trauma response is just hardwired right into their nervous system.
Exactly. And that seems to be exactly what Israel is experiencing on that shoreline. The physical chains are broken, but the very second real pressure is applied, they just snap back into the posture of slaves.
They're begging to return to the familiar misery rather than face the unscripted unknown of freedom. And that psychological reality makes Moses' response to their panic just absolutely staggering.
Because he's looking at a mob of 2 million terrified people.
Right. And he doesn't hand out weapons.
Yeah.
He doesn't try to organize a defensive shield wall or say, hey, quick, let's build some rafts.
Right.
His command in verses 13 and 14 is simply, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent.
You have only to be silent. I mean, I have to stop on that because it is wildly counterintuitive. Think about how incredibly difficult it is to be silent. And still, when every single human survival instinct you have is screaming at you to fight or flee or fix
The
it,
chariots are literally coming.
the ground is shaking, the dust is in their lungs, and the instruction from the guy in charge is, stand still, do nothing, just watch.
Well, the text emphasizes that this command to be silent isn't just about, keeping the noise down so Moses can think.
Right, right.
It's a deeply theological posture. The author calls it the active renunciation of self-salvation.
The renunciation of self-salvation, that's a huge concept.
It really is, because as humans, we are completely addicted to the illusion that we can engineer our way out of our own slavery. We desperately want to believe that if we just, read the right books or adopt the right morning routines.
Oh yeah, optimize our lives.
Exactly. We think we can outpace our own pharaohs. We want the credit for our rescue.
We want to be the hero of our own story.
But the biblical framework here asserts something deeply humbling, which is that humanity is just too compromised for self-deliverance. Israel is not going to be saved by their military might.
You don't have any.
Right. Or their strategic ingenuity, or even their moral superiority. I mean, let's remember, they are actively complaining and completely faithless right up to the edge of the water.
So their deliverance has to be entirely 100% the work of an outside party.
Exactly.
Because if they had fought their way out, like say they somehow pulled off this miraculous ambush and they flanked the Egyptians and won, they would have patted themselves on the back forever.
They'd build monuments to their own tactical genius.
Yeah, they would have become their own saviors, which really just replaces one kind of prideful empire with another one.
So the source text is arguing that for salvation to actually transform them, it has to come from outside of them. Human effort has to be completely sidelined.
Which brings us to the actual miracle.
Yeah.
Because human effort is futile, the action has to shift entirely to the divine. And the text gets really specific about the mechanics of how the waters part, right?
It does, and the details are critical here. God doesn't just snap his fingers and instantly teleport the whole nation to the opposite shore. The text in Exodus says, "The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night." And then the waters become walls and the ground becomes dry.
All night.
Yeah, and the author makes a very pointed effort to clarify that this isn't framed as just a lucky tide. It's not a freak meteorological anomaly that coincidentally happened.
Like, oh, the wind just happened to be really strong that Tuesday.
Right. It is presented as a controlled covenantal act of God exercising total dominion over the physical matter of creation.
See, I think we often have this very modern, almost comic book view of miracles. We tend to think of God sort of hacking or breaking the rules of nature.
Like he's violating physics.
Exactly. But based on this source, it seems a lot more like God is reasserting his original rule over chaos. It's less like a hacker breaking into a system and more like a master conductor stepping in front of a chaotic, violently out of tune orchestra.
That's a great image.
And just with a slow, deliberate wave of his baton, he calls all that terrifying noise back into this perfect, beautiful harmony. The sea is finally doing what it was originally designed to do in Genesis, which is obey its creator.
To really understand the weight of that, though, we have to look at how this concept of the sea functioned in the ancient Near Eastern mind.
Okay, tell me about that.
So in ancient cultures, whether we're talking about Canaanite, Babylonian, or Egyptian mythologies, The sea was the ultimate symbol of chaos. It was danger. It was hostile, unmanageable cosmic power.
It was the unknown.
Exactly. If you look at the ancient Ugaritic texts, for example, you have the storm god Baal locked in this violent cosmic death match with the sea god Yam. The sea was quite literally considered a monster.
So how does the Bible play into that?
Well, the biblical text obviously doesn't endorse those pagan mythologies as literal truth, but it absolutely absorbs and subverts their symbolic vocabulary.
Ah, I see.
The sea is the terrifying edge where human control completely evaporates. I mean, you can't pave the sea. You cannot negotiate with a tsunami.
No, you can't.
And right there, at the absolute edge of human limitation, the text argues that God demonstrates he is not some localized tribal deity who only has power, up in the hills or inside a religious temple.
Right.
He is the sovereign Lord of wind, water, timing, and matter. The chaotic deep isn't a rival god to him. It's just obedient clay in his hands.
And he drives it back all night. That detail is just so evocative to me. Can you imagine the sensory overload of standing on that shore for hours?
It would be deafening.
The wind is howling so fiercely, so violently, that it is literally stacking millions of tons of water into vertical walls on your left and your right. And the text notes that Israel passed through on dry ground.
Not mud.
Right. Not a muddy, sloggy marsh that sucked at their sandals and slowed them down.
Right.
Dry ground. God prepares this immaculate, perfectly engineered path right through the epicenter of chaos.
And what's fascinating here is that this specific authority over the chaotic waters becomes a recurring foundational signature of God's identity throughout the rest of the Bible.
How so?
Well, the same Lord who commands the east wind to part the sea in Exodus 14 is the exact same Lord who, centuries later in the New Testament narrative, wakes up in the back of a small fishing boat in Mark chapter 4 and speaks a word of peace to a raging storm.
Peace, be still.
Exactly. To the original readers, the parallel was unmistakable. The authority present in both scenes is identical. The theological claim being made is that the king never lost his dominion.
The universe isn't ruled by blind forces.
No, it's not. The waters might look entirely out of control from our limited vantage point on the shoreline, but they are never out of control to him.
Okay, but I have a really hard time with what happens next, to be honest.
The judgment aspect.
Yeah, we celebrate the parting of the water, and we love this beautifully controlled pathway of salvation. But at the end of the day, a corridor is just geography. What actually stops Pharaoh from just using the exact same dry ground to catch them?
Well, nothing stops him. He does use it.
Right. The path is clear, Israel makes it across, and then the oppressor looks at that same miraculous path and decides to use it. And this is where the story shifts from this beautiful miracle of salvation into a really brutal reality of judgment.
It does.
The waters crash back down on human beings, on soldiers who, let's be real, were probably just following the orders of a megalomaniacal king. How does the source text reconcile this idea of a loving God with the absolute destruction of an entire army?
The tough question, but the source text tackles this directly by pointing out the profound, dark irony of Pharaoh's actions. The author uses this phrase, "The enemy misreads grace as opportunity."
Misreads grace as opportunity.
Pharaoh and his commanders look at a divine cosmic miracle that was meant explicitly for the rescue of an oppressed people, and their arrogance is so blinding that they think, perfect, a convenient shortcut for our chariot.
They just assume it's for them.
They treat holy ground like it is just common infrastructure for their military conquest.
Right.
And the moment they're in the midst of the sea, the waters return.
Your trap snaps shut.
Yes. The same creation that was subdued for rescue becomes an instrument of absolute terrifying justice. Exodus 14 explicitly notes that Israel sees the dead Egyptians washing up on the seashore, and they fear the Lord. The theological framework here is that deliverance comes through judgment, not around it.
But doesn't that just, replace Egyptian violence with divine violence? It's a very heavy, uncomfortable image for modern sensibilities. We squirm at this kind of thing.
It is uncomfortable, absolutely.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the author argues that God's salvation is never presented as morally indifferent.
Morally indifferent. What do you mean by that?
I mean, a God who does not judge evil is a God who does not truly love the oppressed.
Oh, wow.
Right. God does not rescue his people by pretending that systemic evil is harmless, or by simply looking the other way and handing everyone a participation trophy. If Pharaoh's army was just slightly inconvenienced, like say the mud just bogged down their chariots and they all went home, the Israelites would never truly be free.
Because they would spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders.
Exactly.
They would always be hunted. Every time they saw a dust cloud, they'd panic.
Precisely. because the judgment of the oppressors is the absolute guarantee of the freedom of the oppressed. You can't have true liberation if the enslaving power is left intact to strike against Pharaoh.
So redemption has to be costly.
It must be costly and it must be holy. The sea in this story acts as a cosmic courtroom, not just a physical corridor. It draws a stark, fatal distinction between those who trust the promise and those who operate in hard-hearted, violent rebellion.
So grace isn't sentimental here.
Not at all. It is victorious. It forcefully dismantles the things that destroy human life. And the author argues this points directly forward to the Christian understanding of the cross, presenting it as the ultimate intersection where divine mercy for the oppressed and divine justice against evil perfectly and finally meet.
Man. So without dealing with Pharaoh, the escape means absolutely nothing. That is a heavy, heavy truth. So, okay, it leaves Israel standing on the far shoreline. They're looking at the wreckage of the greatest military superpower of their era.
The empire that owned them.
The empire that beat them and commodified them for 400 years. They make it across. Pharaoh's army is gone. And then they sing.
Yeah, Exodus 15.
Exodus 15 is this massive song. But why is this the focus of the text right here? I mean, if you survive a disaster like a hurricane or a flood, you usually just catch your breath, you check your supplies, and you try to figure out where you are going to sleep that night.
Right, logistics.
Yeah, logistics. Why does the text pivot immediately to music?
Well, the author emphasizes that Exodus 15, the Song of Moses, is not just some musical appendix tacked on to the end of the story. It is the proper theological response to salvation.
The proper response.
The theological term used here is doxology, meaning praise or the giving of glory. See, Israel doesn't just survive. If you just survive, you're merely a refugee.
Alive, but adrift.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But God is doing something much bigger. Through this song, they are naming God specifically for what he has just revealed himself to be: a warrior, a redeemer, and a king who will reign forever. Verse 2 says, "The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation."
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, because this challenges a lot of our modern assumptions about freedom.
It really does.
Usually when we think of freedom today, we define it as having zero constraints whatsoever. It's like the idea of a teenager turning 18, moving out of the house, throwing off all the rules, and finally being completely autonomous.
Nobody can tell me what to do anymore.
Exactly. But the framework the author presents is that true biblical freedom is not self-rule. God didn't save them just so they could, wander the desert, find themselves, and speak their own individual truths.
No, the refrain Moses kept repeating back in Egypt wasn't, "Let my people go so they can be autonomous." It was, "Let my people go that they may serve me."
That they may serve me. That distinction changes everything about how we understand the Exodus. Deliverance, in this text, is merely the doorway to a new covenant identity.
God didn't just extract them from a bad situation. He fundamentally transferred their allegiance. They went from serving a cruel, exploitative dictator who viewed them as disposable bricks in his building projects to serving a perfectly good, gracious king who views them as his treasured possession.
So it's a transfer of kingdoms.
Exactly. The ultimate goal of the Exodus was not just geographically escaping Egypt. It was getting to Mount Sinai, receiving the law, building the tabernacle, and entering the promise. It was about being meticulously formed into a holy, worshiping nation.
So the sea was really just the bloody birth canal of a new life.
That's a vivid way to put it, yeah.
And it's a shared life, too. They sing this song together. It's this massive million-voice choir on the beach.
Which the author points out is a massive correction to modern spiritual privatism.
Right, because today it is incredibly common to view spirituality as this deeply solitary, highly curated journey. Just, me, my coffee, and a deep dive by a quiet lake.
The lone wolf faith.
Yeah. But the Exodus narrative recognizes absolutely no concept of an isolated faith. Israel is saved entirely as a community.
They are gathered on that shoreline to share the memory of the trauma, to share the obedience of the law, and to sing the song of salvation collectively. In this framework, you aren't saved just to have a private, internal religious glow. You're saved into a body of people.
You're saved into a choir. You have to learn your part in the harmony alongside people you might not even like, but who are pulled through the exact same water as you.
That's a great point.
And this song on the shores of the Red Sea doesn't just fade out as they walk into the Sinai desert. This single hyper-specific event creates this huge theological ripple effect that basically becomes the structural blueprint for the entire rest of the Bible.
It really does. The infographics provided in our source material map out this grand narrative. They trace how this pattern of deliverance echoes backward into eternity and forward into the end of time.
It's like the master template of biblical theology.
It is. If you look at the infographics, they break this down into an expansive timeline, showing how every major biblical event is essentially a remix of this exact motif.
Well, let's actually walk through this timeline, because looking at the sheer scale of this pattern is pretty mind-blowing. It starts with eternity.
Right.
The source notes that God's redemptive plan existed from eternity past. The deliverance at the Red Sea wasn't God, like, improvising a rescue mission because Pharaoh got out of hand. It was the historical unfolding of a purpose that existed before time even began.
And that moves seamlessly into creation on the timeline. The language used to describe the sea event heavily echoes the language of Genesis 1.
How so?
In creation, the Spirit of God hovers over the chaotic deep, dividing the waters, bringing order and flourishing life out of a threatening, formless void. At the Red Sea, the Creator brings a new nation into being by doing the exact same thing.
Forcing the chaotic waters apart to create a space for life.
Exactly. It is presented as a literal new creation moment.
That's amazing. Then the infographic moves to the fall in the covenant. Egypt, in this grand narrative structure, represents the fall, right? It's the ultimate realm of bondage, systemic oppression, and death.
And Pharaoh is the theological portrait of humanity's arrogant rebellion against God.
But God remembers his covenant with Abraham. The text emphasizes he doesn't save Israel because they passed some moral purity test.
Obviously not, given their complaining.
Right. He saves them because he made a unilateral promise centuries earlier, and his character requires him to be faithful to it.
That leads directly to the concepts of redemption and the kingdom on the timeline. This is redemption viewed in motion. It's liberation achieved by divine power, resulting in release for divine service.
So the enslaved are brought out of the kingdom of darkness, and they are immediately formed into a kingdom of light.
Yes.
But the echoes just keep repeating. It's like the biblical writers literally can't stop using this specific water and rescue motif.
It's everywhere.
You have the story of Noah passing through the deadly, judging waters of the flood in the ark to start a new humanity. You have Joshua halting the rushing waters of the Jordan River so the next generation can cross into the promised land.
And then the Psalms.
Oh yeah, the Psalms are constantly looking back, saying things like, your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters. And then you have the prophet Isaiah, hundreds of years later, comforting a new generation of exiles in Babylon by predicting a new exodus, saying, God will again make a way in the sea.
It's relentless.
It is. So why is water always the boundary?
Because water, both historically in ancient cultures and symbolically in biblical literature, represents the ultimate boundary line between life and death.
Okay, that makes sense.
To go through the water is to pass from slavery to freedom, from the old dying world into the new living world. The sea crossing isn't just an isolated marvel that happened once in antiquity and was forgotten. It establishes the permanent vocabulary for how God saves.
So the pattern is set.
The pattern is absolutely set. Whenever God acts to save his people, he brings them through the impossible, chaotic waters of judgment and out the other side into a completely new reality.
Which brings us to the ultimate Christological fulfillment on the timeline, the Messiah.
This is where it all converges.
The New Testament authors explicitly frame Jesus as the climax of this entire Exodus pattern. The infographic points out 1 Corinthians 5:7, calling Jesus the true Passover lamb. But the detail that absolutely fascinated me in the source text was from Luke chapter 9.
Oh, the transfiguration scene.
Yes, it's the scene of the transfiguration. Jesus is up on a mountain talking in glory with Moses and Elijah, and they are discussing his upcoming death in Jerusalem. The author points out that the literal Greek word Luke uses for Jesus' departure or death is his exodus.
It's brilliant. I mean, wait, really, I'm trying to visualize how the crucifixion is an exodus.
It is one of the most profound, layered connections in the entire New Testament. By using the word exodus, Luke is signaling that Jesus is leading the ultimate cosmic rescue mission. Okay, walk me through the parallels.
Just as God brought Israel safely through the deadly waters, while the judgment fell entirely on Pharaoh, God brings Jesus into the deep waters of death. On the cross, Jesus absorbs the full, terrifying judgment against human sin and rebellion.
But he doesn't stay in the water.
No, he doesn't. Through the resurrection, he comes out on the other side into indestructible new life, and he brings all who are united to him out with him. He permanently conquers the ultimate, final oppressors of humanity, which are not empires or politicians.
It's sin and death itself.
Exactly.
Wow. So Jerusalem is the new Egypt, sin is the new Pharaoh, and the cross is the parted sea. That is incredibly intricate.
It's perfect theological overlay.
And that leads right into the era of the church. The Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 10 that Israel being baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea is a direct theological parallel to Christian baptism. I want to unpack the mechanics of that.
Let's do it.
How does dunking someone in a tank of water or a river connect to 2 million people fleeing chariots?
To understand the connection, you have to think about what happens to the human body underwater.
You drown.
Right. In the ancient mind, going under the water meant you were dying, your lungs burn. You cannot survive in that environment. So when a believer is baptized, they are physically simulating their own drowning.
They are acting out the Red Sea crossing.
Yes, they are declaring, the old version of me, the one enslaved to the Egypt of my sin and rebellion, is being left at the bottom of the sea. And the person who comes up for air is a completely new creation, a citizen of a new kingdom.
So it's a physical reenactment of transferring realms, moving from the domain of the old master to the domain of the new lord.
The old master drowns in the water.
That is a visceral image. And finally, the timeline stretches to the very end of the biblical canon, to the new creation. The book of Revelation gives us this sweeping, culminating vision of the end of history.
Revelation 21.
Yeah, Revelation 21.1. It says that in the new heavens and the new earth there was no more sea. Why would John, the author of Revelation, specifically point out that the ocean is gone? I mean, does God just prefer mountains?
It's highly symbolic apocalyptic language. John is writing to early Christians who were being violently persecuted by the Roman Empire. And remember, that empire often arrived via the sea. Okay, so to John and his readers, the sea represents exactly what it represented to the ancients in Exodus: chaotic, dangerous, hostile, beast-producing power.
So when John writes no more sea, he isn't making a geographical prediction about the coastline of eternity.
Not at all. He is making a massive theological promise. He is signaling the absolute final end of threat, the end of instability, the end of any hostile, chaotic power that can separate humanity from God.
So the sea that once separated people, the sea that threatened to drown the Israelites, the sea that represents death itself is completely and permanently eradicated.
Exactly. In the consummation of all things, the chaos is gone forever.
It is an incredible, sweeping vision. It takes this one terrifying night on a muddy shoreline in the ancient Near East and stretches its meaning from eternity past all the way to eternity future.
It's breathtaking in its scope.
But, I want to pivot for a minute and explore how this blueprint applies to a random Tuesday.
Let's bring it down to earth.
Yeah, we've traced this narrative from the cosmic to the historic. But how do these ancient mechanics actually interface with modern life? The source text outlines some deep practical implications, particularly concerning how we interpret suffering and crisis.
And this is where the theology gets its boots muddy, so to speak. The source text makes a really penetrating point regarding the Christian life. When you are trapped between a very real threat and a seemingly impossible obstacle, the instinctual first question should not be, how do I engineer an immediate escape?
Even though that's all we want to ask.
Of course. But the primary foundational question is actually, what is God revealing about himself in this specific geography of suffering?
So if you are listening right now and you are sitting in a sterile hospital waiting room bracing for biopsy results, or you are staring at an eviction notice, or you are walking through the crushing grief of a divorce you desperately tried to prevent.
You are standing at the edge of your own sea?
The chariots are loud. And the instinct is to scramble, right? To panic, to exhaust every favor and max out every credit card to engineer a way out.
But the framework the author presents suggests that sometimes the passage is intentionally impossible, so that only divine rescue gets the credit.
He doesn't always airlift you out of the crisis before your feet get wet.
No. Sometimes the promise is that he will walk with you straight through the parted, terrifying waters of it. The source has this incredibly anchoring line. The message of Exodus is not that God's people avoid the sea, but that the sea is not the final word.
The sea is not the final word. Man, if we truly internalize that, it would drastically alter how we process anxiety.
It would change everything. And the author practically applies this to daily discipleship, using a phrase that I think perfectly captures the ongoing struggle. He calls it the lifelong process of de-Egypting the soul.
De-Egypting the soul. That goes right back to the rescued animal analogy.
Precisely. Because the physical escape across the sand took maybe a few hours. But the mental escape, rewiring the neural pathways of slavery, that takes a lifetime.
So what does that look like today?
In a modern context, de-Egypting the soul means actively, intentionally confronting our own pride. It means confronting our default setting of complaint when things get hard, and our bizarre, persistent nostalgia for our past bondage.
It means cultivating the discipline to stand still when God's word says stand still, and the courage to move forward when it says move.
Exactly. Discipleship is framed here not as just learning facts, but as a grueling process of unlearning the defensive habits of a slave and learning the trusting habits of a son or daughter of the king.
The source also applies this Exodus framework to leadership, which I found totally fascinating because Moses' behavior here violates basically every rule of modern organizational leadership.
Oh, completely.
Look at Moses in this crisis. He has 2 million panicked, angry people screaming in his face. Modern leadership gurus would say Moses needs to rapidly execute crisis management.
Right. He needs to exude self-confidence, project an aura of invincibility.
Leverage his personal charisma, cast a compelling vision, calm the stakeholders.
But Moses doesn't do a single one of those things. He doesn't manage the crisis at all.
He completely refuses to rely on self-confidence or optics. The framework presented here is that his authority in that terrifying moment comes entirely from revelation, not from his innate charisma or his strategic brilliance.
He simply speaks God's word into the void of the crisis. Stand still and watch God work. The author points out a profound truth about biblical leadership here. Leaders are not saviors.
They are merely witnesses who point to the Savior.
Moses doesn't part the sea. He has no power over the wind. He simply raises his staff and proclaims the God who does.
Which leaves absolutely zero room for the kind of ego we see today.
None.
Modern leaders, whether in corporate business, in politics, and sadly, often in religious institutions, they frequently use crises as platforms to consolidate power and for self-glorification. Look at the brilliant way I navigated our organization through this unprecedented storm.
But the Red Sea completely destroys that playbook. Nobody gets to the other side of the Red Sea and says, man, Moses really engineered a fantastic pedestrian bridge for us. What a guy.
Right. You get to the other side, you look at the towering walls of water, and you fall on your face in absolute awe of God.
When the deliverance is that clearly, undeniably divine, all human boasting is permanently silenced. The ego has nowhere to stand on that shore.
But, because this story is so famous, and because it is such a towering cinematic moment in cultural history, it is incredibly susceptible to distortion.
Oh, it gets twisted all the time.
To fully grasp the power of this theological framework, we really have to critically examine how we so often get it wrong. The author concludes by outlining 5 specific ways this narrative gets hijacked and misunderstood.
And these are so common.
So, if the core message here is that God does the saving, why do I see this story plastered on so many motivational posters and corporate seminar slides telling me to part my own Red Sea? Doesn't that completely reverse the entire point of the text?
Yes. The source lists this as the first major misunderstanding, self-help symbolism. It argues that this story is absolutely not a metaphor for human inner resilience.
But that's how it's used all the time.
It is a complete reversal of the text's meaning. The cultural tendency is to hijack the imagery and say, you can conquer your personal Red Sea, dig deep, find the strength within you to part the waters of your obstacles and achieve your dreams.
It sounds exhausting.
And the author rightly points out that making the story about our inner strength collapses the entire theological architecture of the event. The whole point of the Israelites weeping and panicking on the shore is to meticulously document that they had zero inner strength left.
If the story is reduced to a psychological metaphor for tapping into your own untapped potential, it loses its power to actually save you when your potential runs out.
The foundational premise of the Exodus is that salvation comes from outside of us. We do not and cannot save ourselves.
Okay, the second misunderstanding the source list is deliverance as entitlement. I think we naturally want heroes and villains, so we just assume Israel was rescued because they were the good guys, that they were somehow morally superior to the pagan Egyptians.
A quick reading of the text shatters that assumption entirely. Israel was fearful, constantly complaining, deeply immature, and ready to abandon God at the first sign of trouble.
The theological claim is that they were rescued by pure, unmerited grace.
Based entirely on God's prior covenant promise to their ancestors, not because they had earned a rescue through good behavior. If a reader approaches the text thinking God saves people because they are inherently better or more moral than others, they have fundamentally misunderstood the biblical definition of grace.
The third misunderstanding is ignoring judgment. We struggled with this a little earlier, but it's the danger of trying to soften or edit out the violent defeat of Pharaoh to make the story more palatable for a modern audience.
Right, but the author argues we cannot erase the fact that in this framework, God's holiness necessitates wrath against systemic, unrepentant evil.
A God who does not forcefully judge the oppressor is a God who does not truly love the oppressed.
Exactly. And the fourth danger the author identifies is over-spiritualizing the text.
What does that mean in this context?
This happens when readers divorce the story from its historical, corporate, and covenantal reality. It gets reduced to just a private, warm devotional thought for a morning quiet time, like, God will help me through my tough day at work.
Rather than understanding the massive historical claim that God was literally forming a physical nation in real space and time to bear his name to the world.
Right, it shrinks the story.
Which leads to the final, and according to the author, perhaps the most critical danger for a Christian reading this text: separating the story from Christ. The text insists that the story of the Exodus is fundamentally incomplete without Jesus.
It really is.
If you read Exodus 14 and you marvel at the water and you don't eventually trace that theological trajectory all the way to the cross and the empty tomb, you haven't actually finished reading the story.
The premise of the grand narrative is that all of these ancient historical acts of redemption were intentionally designed shadows. They were pointing forward, establishing the complex vocabulary, the imagery, and the theological categories that humanity would need to comprehend exactly what Jesus was accomplishing when he arrived centuries later.
He is presented as the ultimate flesh and blood fulfillment of every shadow in the Exodus narrative.
Beautifully said.
We have covered an immense amount of conceptual ground today, from the visceral, terrifying reality of a trapped people, to the deep psychology of how slavery lingers in the mind, to the cosmological assertion of God's control over the chaotic sea.
To the deeply uncomfortable but necessary reality of divine judgment.
And finally, tracing that eternal song of praise all the way from a muddy shoreline into the culmination of a new creation.
If we were to synthesize the ultimate takeaway from Velazquez's analysis in these detailed timelines, it would be this. The text demands we recognize reality.
Bondage is real.
The danger you face in this world is real. The judgment against evil is real and necessary. But the overarching claim is that God is more real than all of it.
The framework argues that he makes a way where the geography of human logic says there is absolutely no way.
He decisively defeats the enemy. He transfers our allegiance to himself, and our only sane, proper response to that kind of grace is to remember the rescue, to trust his character in our present crises, and to lift our voices with the choir.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. We spent time unpacking this concept of de-Egypting the soul. The profound reality that while deliverance from a trap can be a sudden event, true freedom is a grueling, lifelong process of rewiring the heart.
It takes time.
So look honestly at your own life right now. The physical chains of whatever used to hold you might be completely gone, but what lingering Egypts in your own mindset are keeping you mentally trapped on the shoreline?
Where in your life are you still cowering in fear, waiting for the sound of the chariots, even though the waters of your own rescue have already been parted?
That is a question that requires some deep, uncomfortable, and incredibly necessary reflection.
It really does.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive through the waters of Exodus. Remember, whether you are standing on the shoreline, terrified of what is coming over the horizon, or you are walking right through the impossible, towering middle of a crisis, the framework we explored today insists you are not alone. Between the chaos of the sea and the hope of the promise, God's presence is always enough. Catch you on the next deep dive.